I grew up in an unremarkable suburb, in a small house with just my mom and me. To me, that was the whole world. No dad, no siblings, just mom and me. But I never felt short on love. Mom worked all sorts of jobs to raise me. Sometimes she was a cashier, other times a temp office assistant. Dinner might just be instant noodles with an egg, but I was never starved for affection. Mom always put me first. No matter how tired she was, she made time to talk, help with homework, or read me a bedtime story. To me, she was the entire universe. Of course, I noticed things around me. Classmates had dads who picked them up from school, showed up at parent-teacher meetings, or took them on family vacations. I'd listen quietly, then go home and ask Mom. I asked who my dad was, why he wasn't with us. She never dodged the question. She told me he died when I was very young, lost in an accident at sea. A big wave flipped the boat he was on with some friends. They sank into the deep, and angels carried them to a better place. I was little, so I believed it. I even found comfort imagining my dad in a brighter, gentler place where the sea wasn't so wild. Sometimes I'd watch underwater cartoons, thinking living at the bottom of the ocean might not be so bad. But if angels took my dad, heaven must be even better. Kids have naive thoughts like that, and I spent my childhood picturing a kind, family-loving dad who just met an unlucky fate. Those memories weren't as sad as people might think. Mom painted a beautiful picture for me. I grew up without resentment, just a twinge of regret. If anything made me wistful, it was never hearing his voice, never knowing the smell of his jacket, never having a clear memory of him. But then I'd think, Mom's enough. That woman gave me everything good in life. While other kids cried over parents fighting, I was grateful I never saw that. When friends talked about strict dads, I told myself at least my mom was always gentle. And so I grew up in that world, a peaceful one Mom built, filled with lovely stories about Dad, with no room for dark corners. But some truths, no matter how carefully hidden, find their way back. I don't recall exactly when Mom told me Dad died. Maybe when I was 6, maybe earlier. She spoke so softly, like telling an old fairy tale with an ending already written. No sobs, no tears, just a sad truth she'd learned to accept. I remember her sitting by my bed, stroking my hair, saying Dad loved the sea. He and his friends rented a boat to enjoy the last days of summer. But the sea isn't always kind. A sudden storm came, and a massive wave swallowed everything. The boat never returned, and neither did Dad. I asked if she saw him one last time. She gently shook her head. I asked if he was scared. She paused, then said he probably didn't have time to be scared it happened so fast. Then she said something I'd never forget. After sinking, Dad and his friends weren't left in the dark. Angels came and took them to the sky, a place far better than the ocean's depths. It sounded odd, but I believed her. Kids trust anything said with sincere eyes. I pictured Dad in a sunny place, light filtering through clouds, boats drifting on calm waters. That's how I coped with a loss I didn't fully grasp. Time passed, and I stopped asking questions. Everyone around assumed Dad died in an accident, a sad but straightforward loss, nothing suspicious to dig into. His death, as Mom told it, was like a sudden car crash in the journey of life. The only difference? No funeral, no portrait, no gravestone to visit on holidays. I never saw a clear photo of him. Maybe Mom kept them private, or maybe none were clear enough. I didn't ask. I already had an image in my mind, a man with a kind smile, warm eyes, and protective hands, woven from Mom's stories whenever I got curious. I grew up in that sweet comfort. No doubts. No need to question. To me, the truth was clear. My dad was a good man, taken too soon by cruel fate. And Mom, the one left behind, was strong enough to keep his memory pure, untainted by tragedy. Or so I believed. Until a simple question on an ordinary afternoon changed everything. It was a typical day. I visited Mom for the weekend, bringing pastries and 2 cups of tea. The air was chilly, So we sat close in the small living room, warmed by steaming tea and light chatter about work, neighbors, and the weather. Mom seemed calm, but I noticed her glancing at the window like she was checking for something. Those eyes, the gentle ones I'd known my whole life, held a hesitation I couldn't read. When I set my tea down, she looked at me for a long moment and asked, soft as a breeze, "If there were things I never told you about your dad, would you want to know?" The question was simple, but I felt its weight. It wasn't a casual confession. It was a door cracking open to a room locked for years. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to nod, to know everything. But another part held back. I knew once I crossed that line, there was no going back. Half joking, I asked, "You mean something bad?" She didn't smile. She lowered her eyes, silent for a moment. Then she said gently, "Maybe. I'm not sure if you want the whole truth or just the good parts about your dad. If you say no, I won't say more. But if you want, I'm ready." I don't know why, but I couldn't say no. Her question was like an invitation to a part of life I didn't know but felt tied to. I nodded, softly but firmly. "Tell me, Mom. I want to know, whatever it is." She looked at me, as if making sure I was steady enough. Then she began. No more soothing words like when I was a kid. No angels, no calm seas. This time, it was the raw, unfiltered truth. I didn't know what I was bracing for, but it wasn't what I was about to hear. The truth wasn't like a torn cloth, it was a door blown open by a storm. I was no longer the kid imagining heaven, but an adult facing a past ripped apart. Mom spoke slowly, her voice steady, as if each word was chosen to keep memories from shattering. "Dad," she said, "wasn't perfect, but he was good. Not eloquent, not ambitious, not chasing wealth. He just wanted a small family, a cozy home, a normal life like anyone else. To Mom, he was simple, sincere, a bit reserved, but always trying to do right." I grew up with that image, a dad who was gone but lived in Mom's gentle stories. A figure I could look up to. I imagined if he were alive, he'd garden, fix broken things, and tell goofy jokes at dinner. A quiet listener who made you feel safe just by being there. But then Mom sighed, her eyes dimming, as if she was about to tear that image apart. I thought he'd pull through, but not everyone's strong enough to fight the pressure. It turned out, before he disappeared, Dad was in a crisis. Not illness or debt like the rumors around town, but a silent, suffocating deadlock. He'd been jobless for nearly a year. He hid it from family and friends. Every morning he left the house like he was going to work, but he'd sit for hours in his car in an old parking lot by the woods. Mom found out by chance, and instead of getting mad, chose silence not out of weakness, but because she saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of blame, but of letting people down. Of losing his role as the provider. Of not being enough to stay. A quiet fear every man feels at some point. Mom said some nights he stayed up, silent, no tears, just staring into the distance, hands clenched, holding on to something invisible. "I just wished someone could have pulled him out of that hole," she said. "But I wasn't enough. He wouldn't talk, wouldn't ask for help. I watched him fade, like a shadow. And then, one day, he didn't come back." Her story wasn't about a tragic accident anymore. No storm, no boat. Just silence, the scariest thing for those left behind. I sat there, stunned. The idealized dad didn't vanish. He became real, sharper, and more painful. He wasn't a victim of fate. He was someone who sank under pressure nobody could save him from. And Mom, the strongest woman I know, chose to preserve his best self for me all these years, so I could grow up without heavy grief. But at some point, the truth had to come out, not to blame anyone, but to understand and forgive. Mom stood and walked to her old bedroom, She returned with a small wooden box, weathered by time. Without opening it, I knew she'd hidden it for years, not because it was dangerous, but because it held wounds that hadn't healed. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were a few old photos, a scratched silver wedding band, and a sealed letter, its edges worn but the handwriting clear. It was from Dad, never sent. "He left this the night before he went," she said. "I didn't want you to read it when you were too young. I thought about burning it, but I kept it, knowing you'd need it someday." I held the letter, hesitant, as if not reading it would let me keep the dad I'd imagined. But I opened it. The handwritten words were neat, calm, like the man Mom described. The letter was short. No long explanations, no complaints, no blame. Just a quiet goodbye, an admission he'd reached his limit. "If you're reading this one day, I might be gone. Don't blame your mom. Don't blame yourself. Some things in my heart were too heavy for anyone to lift, even me. But you're the best thing I ever had." I folded the letter, eyes stinging. It wasn't a desperate note. It was an open-ended message, not complete, not dramatic, but enough to sear into memory. I realized some pains don't heal with time, you just learn to carry them. And sometimes, people leave not because they stop loving, but because they run out of strength to stay. Dad wasn't a hero or a villain. He was just a man, like many, wrestling with invisible pressures from society, family, and himself. I sat there, letter in hand, heart heavy. But amid the pain, something grew understanding. And in understanding, the seed of forgiveness. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the old room, listening to the wind whisper through the window, like echoes from the past. In the dark, things became clearer. The questions that haunted me for years about Dad, his absence, the nameless void in my heart had answers. But the truth came with real pain. I'd been angry at him, for not staying, for leaving Mom to carry everything, for not seeing me grow, stumble, and get back up. But now I wasn't angry. I just felt sorrow. Sorrow for a man who fell silently, for the mornings he left to save face, for choosing a departure that hurt no one but left a wound that never healed for those he loved. I felt for Mom too. A woman who lived decades with half a heart, wrapping her grief in smiles, in meals, in gentle stories about Dad so I could grow up with hope, not shadows. The next morning, I made Mom a cup of tea and set the letter on the table. "Keep this, Mom. If I have kids someday, I want to tell them. Not about the sadness, but to teach them not everyone who falls is weak. Sometimes they tried to be strong too long." She nodded, eyes wet. "I don't know what you'll think reading this. Maybe it'll make you sad. Maybe you've been through something similar. Or maybe you're carrying a burden nobody sees. If so, I want to say, you're not alone. We're taught to push through, be strong, win. But nobody teaches us to sit down, breathe, and admit we're tired. That we need help. That we don't need to be perfect to be loved. If you're feeling overwhelmed, talk to someone, a friend, a counselor, or just a kind pair of eyes. Sometimes, someone sitting beside you, not judging, not pushing, is enough to pull you back from the edge. I'm not writing this to reopen wounds, but to remind you. Silence can kill a soul, but a simple check-in can save one. And if you're someone left behind like me, like Mom, forgive. Not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace. A week later, I left my hometown. Not to escape, but because it was time to move forward, carrying what mattered. On the bus back to the city, I looked out the window. The endless pine forests, misty hills, and winding roads I biked as a kid, they seemed to say goodbye. Not sad, not happy, just acceptance. Some things in life can't be fixed or forgotten. Instead, you learn to live with them. Like a scar, it doesn't vanish, but it stops hurting when touched. I saved a photo of Dad's letter on my phone. Not to reread, but to remind me. Feelings are real. Struggles are real. But if you don't share, don't admit them, you can lose yourself. I wrote this story not as a tale of grief, but as a message for anyone going through something similar. For those who smile outwardly but crumble inside. For those who think they're not enough or a burden. You're not alone. You don't have to hide anymore. Maybe you're in Maine's forests, where winters bite and nights drag on. Maybe you're in a bustling city. But feelings, they connect us across places and lives. Ask someone nearby. You doing okay? No advice, no fixes, just presence. It can change someone's day. And if you're carrying a nameless sorrow, this is for you. Speak. Text someone. Write. Breathe. Live. Not perfect, but real. Not strong, but real. Because the world needs you. I don't know if Dad would feel lighter reading this, but I believe if he could go back, he wouldn't choose silence. He wouldn't let pain bury him in the dark. I'm not telling this story to blame, judge, or fully heal, but to remind us we need each other. Not just in joy, but in our weakest moments. If you've read this far, thank you. Thank you for listening to a memory that's not yours, but might echo in your heart. If this means something, share it. Someone out there might need it. And if you're standing at an edge, don't jump. Turn back. Call out to someone. We're here. Those of us who've suffered silently but finally spoke up. You're not alone. Never. When I was a kid, I never understood why Mom never talked about Dad. Nobody in the house did, either, like he'd never existed. But I remember him clear as day, taking me out to the edge of the woods every fall afternoon, showing me how to spot deer tracks, teaching me to listen to the wind to know when the seasons were about to shift. Then one day, he went hunting and never came back. I was too young to piece it all together, but I knew something was wrong. That night, the house was dead quiet, no lights flickering on like usual. Mom sat in the kitchen, eyes red, not saying a word. My uncle showed up later, whispered something to her, and left quick. It felt like everyone was hiding something big from me. From that day on, Dad's existence seemed to vanish. No funeral, no photo on the mantle. His room stayed untouched for a while, then got locked up tight. When I asked, Mom's answer was always short. Your father's gone, and he's not coming back. I didn't know whether to be sad or angry. As I got older, I tried to stop thinking about him. But every hunting season, my chest would get heavy. The distant crack of a rifle in the woods would catch in my throat, like something unsaid was stuck there. One time, I asked Mom point blank, "What really happened to Dad?" She shook her head, silent for a long time, then said, "You're too young to understand, and some things are better left buried." That stuck with me for years. It didn't answer anything, but it made the ache worse. When you grow up in a family where everyone pretends to forget something, you're the one who can't let it go. Time passed, and I grew up like the other kids around here. Went to school, got a job, tried to live decently and not dwell on things nobody wanted to talk about. To outsiders, I was just a regular guy, maybe a bit quiet, but nothing unusual. Nobody knew I carried a hollow space inside me, one I couldn't name. Sometimes, seeing a father and son fishing by the lake or hearing someone talk about a weekend hunting trip would hit me hard. Not jealousy, just memories flooding back, no matter how hard I'd tried to bury them. I learned to keep Dad out of my stories. Eventually, even my closest friends forgot he'd ever been part of my life. I let them think I grew up with just Mom and a few distant relatives. It was easier that way. Nobody digs too deep into someone else's old wounds. But at night, when I couldn't sleep, fragments would come back. His face, his tall frame in hunting gear, the crunch of his boots on dry leaves, the faint smell of gunpowder on his jacket when he came home. Sometimes I wondered, did I miss something? Was there a clue I was too young to catch? They say memory picks and chooses, holding on to what the heart can't let go. But I think some memories get pressed down so hard they twist into something else like a nightmare tied up, waiting for the day it's set free. No matter how many years I tried to forget, the truth was still there, buried under time's dust. And I started to feel there was something unsaid, something I needed to know, no matter how much it hurt. I thought the past would stay buried forever until one winter night, when the wind howled through the window cracks and the old landline rang out of nowhere. It was my uncle, the one who'd shown up that night Dad disappeared, then faded from our lives. He didn't make small talk, just asked if I was free, then said softly, "I need to see you. There's something. It's time you knew." Those words hit like a sledgehammer. Nobody in our family ever talked about a time to know. It was always off limits. So why now, after all these years, was he bringing it up? We met at a small diner on the edge of town. Nobody else was around, just the crackle of the fireplace and the faint smell of apple pie in the air. He looked at me for a long time before speaking. His eyes carried something heavy, like he'd been holding onto it for years. He said that the night Dad disappeared, not everyone believed it was an accident. I froze. He didn't give details, but said things were overlooked in the report. Strange signs at the scene. A jacket hung neatly on a branch, even though it was drizzling and the ground was muddy. No blood, no signs of a struggle, just a hunting rifle found clean and wiped dry. It didn't look like a hunter's accident, he said. It was like someone staged it. I couldn't speak. My throat burned. All those years, I'd told myself to stop digging, to let whatever was hidden stay that way. But now, the silence felt like a betrayal. Before he left, he said something that kept me up all night. There might be someone in the family who knows more than they've told you. After that, I saw everything differently. It wasn't just a random disappearance anymore, it was a mystery with intent. And the worst part? The thought that someone close to me, someone I'd shared meals with, grown up alongside, might know more than they let on. I went back to Mom's old house. It had been sold years ago, but the shed out back still held some old boxes. Mom passed 2 years ago from illness, never leaving a word about Dad. I'd never pushed her, and she'd never offered. In a rotting cardboard box, I found a small tin with a few old photos, a worn notebook, and a folding knife with Dad's name carved into it. I didn't know what I was looking for, but each item felt like it was whispering something. The notebook stopped me cold. Nothing clear, just scattered notes. Dates, weather, names of men from town, and a few scribbled lines about the western woods, where Dad supposedly vanished. One line was circled twice. "Don't believe everything he says." I frowned. He? Who? My uncle from the other night, or someone else in the family? The question gnawed at me. I took an old photo to a restoration shop in town. The old guy behind the counter looked at a picture of 5 men and pointed to one half hidden in the back. "You know him? Disappeared in that hunting accident. Word was, he had a falling out with someone in your family a few months before." That was the first I'd heard of any falling out. Nobody ever mentioned arguments or bad blood. Everyone painted Dad as a quiet, kind man who helped neighbors without a second thought. Now I wondered, was that the truth? Or a curtain hiding something bigger? A week later, I did something I'd never considered before. I went back to the woods where Dad was said to have disappeared. Not to find evidence after all these years. There'd be nothing left. I just wanted to feel that coldness from back then, to see if something was still lingering. The forest looked ordinary rows of old pines swaying in the breeze, trails covered in leaves, and a silence so thick it pressed against you. But standing there, staring into the trees, a chill ran down my spine. Not from the wind, but from a gut-deep unease like this place had seen something it shouldn't have. After that, I tracked down a few of Dad's old hunting buddies. It wasn't easy, most had moved away or clammed up when they heard I was asking about the past. One older guy finally talked. He looked at me like he was seeing a ghost, then said slowly, "There's something you need to understand. In a town like this, people stay quiet not because they don't know, but because they know too much." He told me about the morning Dad disappeared. A few things didn't add up. One guy in the hunting group left early, claiming a stomachache, but he never showed up for the investigation, never gave a statement. Back then, people brushed it off, nobody wanted to stir up more grief. I asked for the guy's name. He wouldn't say, just told me, "Pay attention to the ones who stay the quietest." That cut deep. I started thinking about family members who had dodged my questions about Dad over the years. Could one of them be hiding something? The loneliness grew sharper. Everything I thought I knew about my family, my childhood, our bond was starting to crack. I went back to the little bar on the edge of town, where folks swapped stories over beers on weekends. Out of nowhere, a middle-aged woman in the corner recognized me and whispered, "You don't know this, but someone saw headlights in the woods the night your dad disappeared. A truck, speeding off. Nobody mentioned it the next day. Cops didn't look into it." I asked who saw it. She shook her head with a faint smile. That person left town a few months later. From that moment, I saw my family in a new light. The stories Mom told, my uncle's silence, my aunt's averted eyes whenever I brought up Dad, they weren't meaningless anymore. They were too clear, like puzzle pieces snapping into place. I went back to my uncle's house where I'd stayed after Mom passed. Dinner that night was just us, and the familiar kitchen felt suffocating. The silence was so thick I could hear the clock ticking. I didn't beat around the bush. I asked straight up, "Did you know what happened to Dad?" He looked up, no anger, no surprise, just a long, heavy stare. Then he got up, went to the storage room, and rummaged around for a while. When he came back, he set an old wooden box on the table. Inside were some documents, blurry photocopies of a police report, witness statements, photos of the scene where Dad supposedly vanished. But what stopped me cold was a handwritten letter from Mom to my uncle, dated just weeks after that day. It wasn't long, but it hit like a punch to the gut. "I know it was an accident, but if you don't speak up, I'll never forgive myself. The boy deserves to know the truth when he's old enough." I read it 3 times to make sense of it. Mom knew. And my uncle, he was there. He didn't kill Dad, but he didn't stop whatever happened. It wasn't what I'd thought. Not some stranger harming him, but a family conflict, maybe an argument, a misunderstanding, or something worse that everyone chose to bury. I looked at my uncle. He gave a small nod, like he was admitting it without words. Then he said, "Back then, nobody had the guts to break the peace. The cost was silence, and I've lived with that cost all these years." I didn't cry. I just felt empty. My whole childhood was built on a story missing its most important piece. That hollow space I'd carried finally had a shape, and it hurt more than I'd ever imagined. After that, I wasn't myself anymore. The truth I'd chased became a weight on every breath. I didn't know what hurt more. How Dad left, or how my family stayed silent, letting me grow up with a question nobody answered. I stayed up nights, my mind spinning. Should I go public? Take it to the police, even after all this time? Write the whole truth for the town to know? But then I thought of the people still here. My uncle, the old man who'd quietly looked after me after losing his sister and best friend. Mom who'd carried more than I ever knew. And myself with memories of a home that, flawed as it was, never lacked love. Was there a justice worth breaking what was left? I went back to the woman at the bar, the one who'd mentioned the truck's headlights. I asked her straight, "If you were me, what would you do with what you know?" She looked at me for a long time, then said in a gravelly voice, "I've kept secrets most of my life not out of fear, but because I know some truths don't change anything except to hurt people more. But if you still feel it's not right, at least write it down. Not to point fingers, but so you can breathe." That loosened a knot in my chest. I didn't need to make a scene, didn't need revenge or to expose anyone. but I couldn't bury it again either. So I started writing. Every line, every detail, every ache. I wrote it all not with names, but with memories. Not to accuse, but to remember. To give a place to what had been denied. I posted it on a small online forum where people share stories of loss, hidden truths, things nobody dares say out loud. Not many read it, but it was enough to lighten my heart. I didn't wait for judgment. Didn't expect anyone to weigh in on right or wrong. I just needed to know I hadn't stayed silent like the others. That I'd chosen to face it. And that, maybe, was the only way to hold on to Dad, not with a photo or a story, but with the full truth, even if it came late. After posting, I thought I'd feel empty, like I'd poured out everything and had nothing left to hold on to. But instead, I felt a strange relief. For the first time, I didn't have to pretend I was okay. Didn't have to lie to myself. Nobody reached out. Nobody asked questions or dug into the past. The town kept on as it always had, quiet, closed off, with an unspoken rule. Let old things stay in the past. I went back to our old house, the one that used to be home. The roof was weathered, the backyard overgrown, the wooden doors creaking in the wind. But it didn't feel heavy anymore. It was just a house, simple as it always was. I spent a few days cleaning, not to fix it up or move back, but as a ritual. Wiping down window frames, gathering old photos, piecing together the fragments time had torn apart. In an old drawer, I found Mom's journal. Nothing special, just a few scattered entries. But one line stopped me. We don't need to tell the world the truth, just have the courage to live it ourselves. I closed the journal, stepped out onto the porch. The sunset spilled orange across the hills, lighting up the forest behind the house. The breeze felt cool and calm. I wasn't angry anymore. Didn't need justice in the usual sense. Because sometimes, fairness isn't about courts or apologies. It's about facing the past and accepting what happened, as it was. I left the wooden box and Mom's journal with my uncle, along with a short note. I understand now. Thanks for carrying it all those years, even if it wasn't easy. He didn't reply, but I know he got it. Since then, I've lived lighter. Not because everything's fixed, but because I'm not carrying the weight of unanswered questions anymore. Freedom, in the end, didn't come from holding anyone accountable. It came from letting myself out of the past's grip. Some stories don't have neat endings. Nobody gets arrested, nobody confesses, no news report uncovers a forgotten truth. But that doesn't mean the story doesn't matter. For me, chasing the truth wasn't about changing the past. It was about understanding how I'd lived in it, why I always felt a piece was missing, and why that unease grew so big. I don't carry anger when I think of Dad anymore. I just remember him as someone who was here, who loved, and who got caught in a tragedy none of us had the courage to name. And that daring to remember, to face it, to write it down is enough to feel closer to him than any photo ever could. I don't live in that town anymore, but I go back sometimes. Not to dig for more answers, but to sit by the lake where Dad used to hold me when I was little. Where there was once laughter, then silence. Where it all began, and where I let it all go. Ever feel like your family's past is a locked room? One where everyone knows something's inside, but nobody dares turn the key? If you do, maybe you'll get this. The most important journey isn't about uncovering every secret. It's about stepping into that room with a light heart, no judgment, and just shining a little truth on it, even if it's just a flicker. No need for anyone to agree. No need for a verdict. Just don't keep staying silent. Feel free to leave a comment if you've ever felt something similar. Or share your own story, because maybe, just maybe, sharing it will make someone else feel less alone in their search for answers. Don't forget to follow if you want more stories that touch on pain but also open up hope. Every story is a wound that gets to be heard. Thanks for sticking with me to the end. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, tucked among rows of unremarkable homes, stood a house that blended into the scenery yet felt oddly out of place. From the outside, It was nothing extraordinary, just another single-story home with a sloped, shingled roof. But a closer look revealed something peculiar. The house was fused to a 3-story apartment building, all sharp concrete angles and modern lines, as if 2 eras had been stitched together against their will. One side whispered of old New England charm. The other screamed of utilitarian progress. It was a strange marriage of architecture that made passers-by do a double-take. But it wasn't just the mismatched design that caught attention. There was something about the place, an unspoken unease that hung in the air. It wasn't the look of the house, but the way it made you feel, like you were being watched, like something was just off. The owner was a retired electrician, a man in his later years who kept to himself. He was polite enough, nodding to neighbors, but never one for small talk. To the tenants renting his apartments, he was a stickler for rules. Notices were posted on every floor. Keep the place clean, stick to curfew, no loud music. Most complied out of respect or maybe fear of crossing him. He wasn't unkind, but he had a way of making you feel like you'd rather not test him. One rule, however, stood above the rest. Repeated so often, it became a quiet obsession for those who lived there. No one is allowed in the basement. No exceptions. Not for leaks, not for electrical issues, not for anything. The basement door was always locked, the key nowhere to be found. No one knew what was down there. No one dared to ask. To some, it was just the quirk of a cranky old man. But those who stayed long enough felt it a nagging sense that the basement held something no one was meant to see. And they were right. No one is born a monster. Every story has a beginning, and this man's was no exception. Beneath his reserved exterior, behind the walls of that odd house, was a past heavy with loss and pain. He grew up in a small Maine town, the kind where everyone knows your name but not always your struggles. His father walked out when he was 4, leaving no note, no reason, just an empty space. It was just him and his mother after that, scraping by in a community that wasn't always kind. Before he could grasp what love felt like, he lost the one person who'd ever shown it to him, his older brother, killed in the war. The loss broke his mother, but instead of grieving quietly, she turned her pain on her remaining son. Harsh words, heavy hands, and a demand for absolute obedience carved away at his childhood day by day. Those memories didn't fade. They burrowed deep, shaping a man who learned to hide his wounds behind a polished facade. At 18, he left home for a technical school, cutting ties with his past. No visits, no calls, no one checking in. After graduating, he married young a girl barely 20, and they started a family. To the outside world, he was a model husband, a dutiful father. But inside, the scars of his youth never healed. He seemed determined to rewrite his story, building a big family, a warm home, everything he'd been denied. Yet no matter how many kids filled the house, the darkness within him lingered. Year by year, the gap between the man he showed the world and the one he truly was grew wider. To neighbors, he was just a stern dad, maybe a bit cold. No one suspected that something dangerous was waking up inside him. Until it wasn't just inside anymore. Sometimes the cracks in a person don't show up in a blaze of chaos. They start small, subtle, creeping like frost on a window. For this man, the signs emerged in the late 1960s. He had a bustling family by then, including a newborn daughter, the youngest of his children. But instead of nurturing his home, he began to unravel. It started with stalking. He'd drive hours to a nearby town, tailing a young nurse he'd never met. He didn't approach her, didn't speak, just watched, memorizing her routine. One night, when her husband was away, he broke into her apartment. She woke to a knife at her throat. What happened next was unthinkable, a crime committed by a stranger who, to everyone else, was a family man with a house full of kids. Other women later reported being followed or harassed by him in smaller ways. But somehow, the system let it slide. In court, he faced only 18 months for the assault. He served a year and walked free. People whispered, "How could such a serious crime get such a light sentence?" But like so many cases, it faded into the background. The world moved on. He stayed quiet, acting as if nothing had happened. After prison, he didn't return to engineering. Instead, he took a job with a small construction company back in his hometown, picking up side gigs as a traveling salesman. The constant movement kept neighbors' questions at bay. Everyone assumed he'd turned over a new leaf, but the truth was darker. Prison hadn't reformed him. It had only made him more careful, more cunning. He didn't stop. He just got better at hiding. When the darkness stopped lurking outside, it crept into the one place that should have been safe. His own home. And the ones who suffered most were those closest to him, the ones who couldn't escape. Of all his children, his youngest daughter caught his attention in a way that chilled the blood. She was 11 when his behavior shifted. At first, it was words, glances, fleeting touches, things that could pass as a father's strictness. But slowly, it became something else, something that left a quiet dread in its wake. It started with yelling, irrational demands, then private talks behind locked doors. To the rest of the family, everything seemed normal. He still went to work, tended the garden on the roof, fixed the breaker when the power went out. Inker. But when those doors closed, boundaries dissolved. For 6 years, she lived in a silent storm of fear and shame. She didn't dare speak, didn't know who to tell, didn't believe anyone would believe her. Because the man wasn't a stranger. He was her father. There's a cruel truth many don't grasp. When the one who's supposed to protect you is the one causing harm, you learn to stay quiet to survive. He knew that. He used it. He crushed any spark of resistance with absolute control. But time passed, and she grew older. At 16, she enrolled in a vocational program for culinary arts, a rare chance to step outside the house. He allowed it, perhaps thinking it would pacify her, keep her off guard. What he didn't expect was that a sliver of freedom could ignite hope. And sometimes, all it takes is a crack in the door to dream of a way out. You might think you're free, only to realize you've stepped into a larger trap. That's what happened when she started her culinary program. Those brief hours away from home were like the first breath of fresh air after years of suffocation. Out there, she saw kids her age laughing, living lightly, unburdened by the weight she carried. And like so many young people in stifling homes, she began to dream of escape. A few months into the program, she made a plan. With a friend, she fled the town, heading for the city, a place loud and crowded where she could vanish into the noise. She packed light, left no note, just wanted to disappear, even for a few days. But the law wasn't on her side. Still under 18, she was a minor in the eyes of the state. When the police found her, they didn't ask why she ran. They brought her back to the house, back to her father, back to a basement she didn't yet know she'd face. After that, he seemed to soften. Less shouting, fewer demands, even moments of what looked like care. She was allowed out alone for short stretches, could talk to her siblings, pick her own clothes. It was all a performance, a calculated shift. She thought her escape attempt had made him see his wrongs. But he wasn't afraid of losing her. He was afraid of losing control. And the way to ensure that never happened again was to make sure she could never run. Months after her 18th birthday, a milestone that should have meant freedom, he acted. No more sneaking, no more veiled threats. This time, it was meticulous, every detail planned. A scheme no one could have imagined, carried out in the very house where she grew up. It began in the basement no one was allowed to enter. The day the basement door closed was the day her freedom ended. No screams, no loud resistance, just cold, calculated silence. A trap set long before. When she stepped inside, everything was swallowed. Above ground, no one suspected a thing. The basement was built to be invisible, thick concrete walls, no windows, no natural light, no cell signal, no connection to the world. a place designed for isolation, as if he'd planned it years in advance. She wasn't just locked away. She was controlled her time, her food, her actions, even her sleep. To the world, she'd vanished. Police were called, neighbors joined searches, posters went up. The news buzzed with her face, her story. They checked rivers, woods, but never thought to look just a few feet below her own home. Her father played the part of a grieving parent. He told neighbors she'd run off, maybe joined a bad crowd. To reporters, he spoke briefly, weary, a hard-working dad raising a big family through tough times. No one doubted him. He was the picture of a man down on his luck. Years passed, 1, 5, 10. Her disappearance became an old story, a faded photo on the living room wall, a tragedy no one believed would resolve. But below, she was alive, and not alone. She gave birth to children who knew no sky, no world beyond concrete. Their windows were walls. Their only family was their mother and the man they called father, all confined to a dim, suffocating space. He believed he'd created a private world, one he could rule completely. And because no one suspected, he thought he'd won. The real cruelty wasn't just the captivity, it was how he twisted their reality, forcing them to live in a warped version of life. For over 2 decades, it went on. Neighbors, old friends, tenants, none could imagine the horror beneath their feet. A forever secret thrives on silence and complacency, but one of those always breaks. After more than 20 years in the basement, she, now a woman, and her children began to weaken. One child, never touched by sunlight or fresh air, fell gravely ill. Fever, labored breathing symptoms no drugstore pills could fix. He faced a choice: let the child die in the dark or bring them into the light. For the first time in years, he couldn't control everything. He took the child to a hospital, but he didn't account for a doctor's suspicion. The child's pale skin, their strange reactions to light and sound, raised flags. His answers vague, inconsistent, didn't add up. No clear story about the mother, no paperwork, no sense. The investigation began. The hospital alerted local authorities. Police stepped in. During questioning, he let slip the unthinkable. The child was born to his own daughter, the one everyone thought had vanished decades ago. The news hit like a bomb. Police swarmed the house, pried open the basement door, and descended into a narrow, pitch-black hallway. What they found wasn't just a room, it was a truth no one could have imagined. A frail woman, trembling, clutching children who'd never seen the world. Even seasoned investigators were shaken. The basement was a fortress soundproofed, locked from outside, monitored by cameras, built to keep them in forever. The story spread like wildfire. Maine and the nation reeled. How could someone hide such a crime for so long? Neighbors were stunned, some refusing to believe it. Others wept, realizing they'd lived above such pain for 24 years without a clue. The trial was tense, the courtroom thick with outrage. The man's calm facade crumbled. His words faltered, his eyes darted away, leaving only the shell of a person who'd committed the unthinkable. And the girl, now a woman of remarkable strength, finally stepped into the light. But light doesn't erase decades of darkness. It was only the start of a new journey, one of rebuilding for her and her children, who'd never known the world. When the cameras dimmed, the headlines faded, and the lengthy sentence was read in a silent courtroom, the story slipped from public view. The father, once a respected neighbor, was convicted on a litany of charges: unlawful imprisonment, incest, child abuse, and years of sustained violence. The sentence was heavy life, effectively. But no punishment could undo the losses. For the woman, freedom wasn't just leaving those walls. It was escaping the memories that clung to her, even when no one held the key. She and her children were moved to a safe place, supported by medical, psychological, and legal aid. But rejoining the world after 24 years of isolation was no simple task. Her children born in darkness met sunlight, cars, trees, strangers' voices for the first time. They flinched at horns, puzzled over signs, didn't know what school meant. One expert said, "This isn't just a crime, it's a tragedy of a society that ignored the quiet signs." Because for years, people had wondered, why did she vanish so suddenly, with no one searching harder? Why were those kids never in school, never at a doctor? Why did no one hear a cry for help if there was one? Was the silence only from a controlling father? Or also from a community that looked away, not wanting to meddle in someone else's business? Many called it a case closed. But for her, it was just beginning. She didn't want to retell her story as a relic of the past. She began to write not out of hate, but to ensure no one else's pain stays buried. She joined forums for abuse survivors, sharing not as a famous victim, but as a survivor of her own home. She said, "The scariest thing isn't being locked in a basement. It's being trapped in the thought that you don't deserve help." What haunts about this story isn't just what happened in the dark, but how it could have happened in plain sight, unnoticed. A respected father, a seemingly normal family, a house hiding an unimaginable tragedy. So, if it were you, would you look closer at the strange signs from the house next door? Have you ever stayed silent about something not your business? If someone close to you sent a silent plea for help, would you see it? Let us know in the comments below. We want to hear your thoughts. Have you ever seen anything like this? Have you felt helpless watching a community stay silent? Don't forget to subscribe to stay updated on real, shocking stories, ones we don't just hear to know, but to awaken. Because sometimes, a single glance, a timely question, can save a life.